More on the heat waves in India and other parts of Asia. Weather watchers describe it as the worst April heat wave in Asian history.
That's right. Weather stations are logging a sea of red as temperatures hit record highs. China, India, Bangladesh, and Southeast Asia all seeing rising temperatures. And scientists say global warming is exacerbating the adverse weather. And experts warn that the heat will hit the poor the hardest, especially those without access to cooling or adequate shelter. All right, for more on the heat wave and its impact, let's speak now with David Karoly. He's a professor emeritus in the School of Geography, Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at the University of Melbourne, and he's also the counselor with the Climate Council, Australia, that is. David, good morning to you. First of all, break down for us why we are experiencing such unusual heat waves of such intensity, duration, and the geographic extent.
Well, let's maybe start back a little bit. It is quite normal for extreme temperatures to occur towards the end of the dry season, heading into the wet season in many parts of South and Central Asia. And so heat waves at this time of year are unusual, but particularly what's happened this year is the extreme nature of these heat waves, as you've described already in India, in Bangladesh, in China. And those extreme temperatures are being exacerbated by climate change. Climate change is increasing the risks of extreme temperatures, making the heat waves more frequent and more intense.
And what are the knock-on effects or implications of these unusual heat waves for the timing-wise? Who will it impact most? Are those in farming and agriculture the ones that come to mind first?
Yes, you're absolutely right. Farming and agriculture are critically affected by these sorts of heat waves, but so are people are having enormous difficulty coping with these extreme temperatures when they don't have access to air conditioning or shelter. And then there's natural ecosystems, plants, birds, animals that also are exposed to these extreme temperatures. Native animals will also have enormous difficulty in coping with these extreme temperatures until there's slight, if you like, amelioration of the extreme temperatures when the rainy season starts in the different areas.
Indeed, it's not yet July, David, a month when many countries in Asia obviously typically experience the hottest days of the year. Any sense of how much longer people will be exposed to such a heat, record-breaking temperatures, and what's the summer going to look like?
Look, I can't tell you how long these specific heat wave will last, but it is likely that there will be extended periods of extreme temperatures associated with the longer-term impact of climate change, as I said, making heat waves in Asia more intense, more frequent, and over larger areas. So until we can fully address the adverse impacts of climate change, we're still going to get these extreme temperatures more frequently and over larger areas in Asia.
So given the urgency of this current situation that we're experiencing, are there any mitigation measures that can be taken in the here and now?
Look, there are a whole range of measures that we can take now. It's critically important to protect human life, and that means making sure that people stay in shaded areas, don't go out in the middle of the day in the hottest temperatures, get into air-conditioned areas, make sure that they drink plenty of fresh, clean water as much as possible, stay hydrated, don't exercise in the middle of the day, in the hottest temperatures in the day, and wherever possible, stay in shaded environments. But in terms of agriculture, it often may mean that it also requires, particularly for animals, to keep them under shelter and protected from the extreme temperatures in the peak heat of the day as well. We can't do that for plant agriculture, but it does mean that the workers on farms may need to spend less time in the middle of the day on the farms and working more earlier in the morning and later in the afternoons and evenings.
And you mentioned that this kind of extreme weather events, we'll see more of it in the future as it becomes a new norm. How should governments prepare for these such extreme events?
Look, what governments need to do is to think about, first of all, the adaptation to the increasing frequency of the heat waves, and that means providing more air conditioning, more protection, more shade, as well as, if at all possible, in urban environments, actually increasing the amount of trees and vegetation that offset some of the heat by providing increased shelter. What we also need to do is to make sure that countries are aware that human-caused climate change will make these heat waves more frequent and more intense. We have only had about 1.1 degrees of global warming. We know that much further global warming is already locked in, but only stronger action to limit global emissions of greenhouse gases that is taken immediately by all developed and developing countries to meet the Paris Agreement targets will be able to limit global warming to under 2 degrees.
And do you sense that there's a responsibility that lies on the more developed countries to help the more developing countries in this regard? Because there is quite a disparity when it comes to resources in being able to cope with these extreme sort of variations in weather.
That you're absolutely right. It is critically important that developed countries take the lead in action on climate change. One of the, if you like, key principles of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is a statement that developed countries, yes, should take the lead in combating climate change. And that means providing additional financial support for climate change adaptation to developing countries, and developed countries so far have not been meeting the commitments that are required under the Paris Agreement to provide financial support to developing countries. And in addition, that financial support, not only adaptation to extreme events, but also the transition to a zero carbon economy to reduce the use of fossil fuels in providing electricity and transport. We need to shift away in developed countries and in developing countries from an economy based on using fossil fuels. We need to shift into a zero carbon economy, not just as rapidly as possible. We need to do it now.
Thank you very much for your expertise and your insight this morning. Professor Emeritus David Karoly from the University of Melbourne.